Hello, everybody. My name is Spoons Rattling, and due to an event that I have to go to, I am doing another quick tier list video, again related to Risk of Rain 2, because a lot of people seem to really enjoy that video, so I decided why not continue on that. This video is just going to be on the gray items, and then eventually we'll cover the greens, the reds, the yellows, the blues, the equipments, the boss items, lunar items, all that jazz. But for now, we're just going to do the gray items, including the DLCs, and sort of rank them in terms of power. And these all will go on the same tier list, so it's going to be a general item strength thing, not just relative to each other. And let's get started. First up, we have the Soldier Syringe. Now, Soldier Syringe is a personal favorite item of mine. I tend to really like survivors that have insane fire rates. Commandos, bullet hose ability, his R. I really enjoy that. I really enjoy dual nail guns on multi. Stuff like that is things I really enjoy. So I really enjoy attack speed, and in general, attack speed is a general good thing to have with most characters. So I definitely think this is definitely... I'm not sure if I would put it in S tier, because I don't think it's quite going to make or break a run, because, I've gone runs without Soldier Syringe and with, and they've been, it's not a game-breaking item unless you get it in insane quantities. Like, if you get to 15 Soldier Syringes, then you'll have so much attack speed that it's just insane, but that's only if you run to a printer or something like that. Next up, we have Forgive Me Please. No, not Forgive Me Please. What am I talking about? Tougher Times. No, Safer Spaces? Tougher Times. This is Tougher Times. The Void one is Safer Spaces. Tougher Times is really solid. It's always nice to just have a chance to negate damage coming at you, and as you stack it, it just gets more likely. Of course, there is a limit to it given the hyperbolic stacking mechanic, but it's harder for me to turn down having at least one of these no matter what. It just gives you a chance, basically. In any situation. Risk of Rain has one-shot protection, and I use heavy quotation marks saying that because I feel like most of the times my run ends, I'm fighting a boss, I get hit with one attack, and then on the next frame I'm dead, so I'm not really sure how effective one-shot protection really is. So this being able to negate damage is just super useful. Definitely one of the best items, best items in the game, in my opinion. I'm not going to put it quite in S tier just because I'm resolving S tier for items that are truly broken to the point where they just invalidate almost everything else. Next up, we have Monster Tooth, and I'm not a big Monster Tooth fan. While this does have some use in Forgive Me Please builds, I don't think it is a particularly great use just because it gives you a bunch of these orbs that heal you a very small amount. And there's just, in general, much better ways to do healing. It's definitely very, very bad, but I'm not going to put it in F, because F is going to be things that are generally completely useless or detrimental, the rare item that actually hurts your run. It's awful. Truly awful. Now, we're getting to our first S-tier item, in my opinion. I don't think anyone's going to argue with me that Lensmaker's glasses are some of the best items in the game. Whether you have one or if you have 10, it's super useful just to have that huge extra damage bonus. It's good on every survivor. Every survivor wants crit damage, or a crit chance, I guess crit damage in the case of Railgunner. And you'll be hard-pressed to find a run where you don't want to have, where you won't end up with 3 of them. On average, I'd say, is the average amount of Lensmakers I tend to have. And if you run into a printer, that can very quickly snowball into a god run, just because you will be doing so much more damage. Definitely fantastic. Next up, we have Goat Leg. Paul's Goat Hoof, I suppose is the proper name. Very, very useful. Definitely at the top of A tier. In my opinion, it is just fantastic. Every survivor wants movement speed. It does reach a point where it's sort of diminishing returns, where you'll start to get too fast, which, surprisingly enough, for some people is a problem. I'm the kind of guy that stacks 8 wax quails, though, so that should tell you everything I need to know about that. Just absolutely fantastic. A Goat Leg is another one of those items you'll want on every run. 1 is huge, and then it just gets better with more. Next up, we have Bustling Bungus. Bungus is a fine healing option. I don't think it's exceptional, but it's definitely, I'd say it's on the upper echelon of healing items. It does have the slight problem of you needing to stand still, which isn't great, though it is useful to just have because Bungus heals you faster than a lot of things does. And it's really good on Engineer, which is always great. Engineer's a fun class, so it's nice to have that, and it can make him very survivable, just having the 2 Bunguses going, or even 3 if you get a Lysate cell. Overall, fantastic. I'm definitely going to put this probably going to end up towards the lower end of B tier, mainly just because as the run goes on, Bungus tends to become less and less important. But early on in a run, just one Bungus can make your run because it makes things like it makes void fields, for example, so much easier because then you get to your next void cell and you just get to heal back up to full in just a few seconds. You don't waste too much time, and you get to get your items much easier. Next up, we have Crowbar. Definitely a sort of a polarizing item, not in the way that people think it's good or it's bad, but it's really good on characters like Railgunner, Rebar, Multi, what's her name, Loader, or Bandit as well. Makes great use of it with his Desperados. Overall, I think Crowbar is really solid as a damage item, though not my absolute favorite. It's not as general purpose as something like Lens Makers, but I do think that at least earns it A tier. I think a lot of these sort of damage items that have their place, I guess that is sort of something to be said, is that the items that, or the characters that Crowbar is good on, Soldier Syringe isn't as good on, generally speaking. And then it flip-flops, of course. Which I think, yeah, that earns them both an A tier, in my opinion. Both super useful, and I will, it's always good to have them. And even on characters where Crowbar isn't super useful, isn't super instrumental, it can be useful just for dealing with things like wisps and small enemies, just because those enemies can sometimes be the secret killers of a run. And of course, it does play a part in some really broken abilities like Railgunner's Overcharge, or even something like Void Fiend's Mouse 2. Like if you hit someone with that with Crowbar, you'll do a lot of damage really quickly. Next up, we have Tri-Tip Dagger. Tri-Tip Dagger is really good as well. I think it sort of falls into a similar tier, probably above these, just because Bleed isn't conditional, and when you get a Bleed build going, it's just crazy. Of course, you can get other ways to apply Bleed, which does sort of lessen the impact of Tri-Tip Dagger, but it's consistent. It gives you a great chance to do it. Each one giving you 10%. It's just fantastic on characters like Multi with nail guns, Commando. It's almost an essential, or a character like Void Fiend again with his beam when he's in transformed mode. It's all generally very useful. Bleed's just fantastic. It's one of the best mechanics in the game and can very quickly snowball into just killing bosses before they even really get a chance to attack. Next up, we have War Banner. Now, I think I'm a little more positive on War Banner than some people are. I think it's a fine upgrade. It's generally useful for the Teleporter event, which is where things are going to get nasty the fastest. And just having those boosts of movement speed around the map as you passively level up is generally useful, though it does have the similar problem with Bungus, where it sort of falls off by the end of the run, where it won't be as common for you to level up, and it won't be as impactful because you'll have more general items. But I still think it ends up in C tier. It's passing, but it's not excelling. It's coasting, really. Next up, we have Cautious Slug. Now, Cautious Slug is a sleeper item. You'll pick up a Cautious Slug, and you won't note it. You won't remember you have it, but you'll feel it, right? Because you'll be regenerating health so much faster. On characters like Multi, this is essential because their health regen is just so slow innately. And in general, again, also super useful for Void Fields. And I rate it higher than Bungus personally, just because it also works while you're moving when you're not in combat, I'm going to put this in A tier. Probably closer to the bottom of A tier, but I love Cautious Slug. It's fantastic. Next up, we have Personal Shield Generator. Now, Personal Shield Generator doesn't do too much, honestly. It just gives you a little bit of extra effective health, is what I'll call it. And that does have its place, its usefulness, though I don't think it's anything, it's not anything standout. It does have a lot of synergy with Plasma Shrimp, which is one of the best void items in the game, in my opinion. And overall, I think is very, very solid. It's not very solid. Plasma Shrimp is. PSG on its own, though, I think is probably... It's a very do-nothing item. It doesn't feel like you have a lot of impact. If you get a lot of PSGs, it can keep you in the fight longer just because shields regen much faster than your health does, But overall, don't think it's very good. Next up, we have Medkit. Now, Medkit is an item that I've warmed up to a lot in recent times. Again, similar to Bungus, honestly, because it helps so much in Void Fields, just because you have... when you're waiting to regen your health, you can just go to the, just step out into the void for 1 second and then step back in and you'll get your heal. Super useful. If you start to stack it can actually start to become rather powerful. Though again, it's very enemy dependent. Against something like a grandparent, it's worthless. It's not going to help you against their big unmatched power of the sun. It's not going to help you there. So I think I'll put it in probably next to Bung. Yeah, no, I'll put it in C tier. Bungus has more uses, mainly just because it's so good on Engineer. But I think Medkit is a respectable item. I like having one. It just helps. It's just a nice extra to have, but nothing major, and it's not an item you can really build around. Gasoline. Gasoline is useful on every survivor. It's useful on burst survivors like Railgunner or Loader, because they will generally struggle with hordes more than others. So having this extra damage is super useful. It's amazing in Forgive Me Please builds, of course, just to stack burn. It synergizes with Ignition Tank really well. Overall, I quite like Gasoline. There's really not much more to say aside from that. And I'm going to put it up here with the sort of similar damage items that I think all accomplish similar things. They're the bedrock of a build, really. The light items are oftentimes the best items in your build, funnily enough. They're just all generally really solid. Now, speaking of, I have to regret to inform you that we're onto a white item that is not good. Flashbang. I don't think Flashbang is good, like, anywhere. Stunning as a mechanic is useful, though when it's reliable, it's useful. Again, Commandos are his bullet hose. Captain's stun beacons are actually surprisingly good, especially if you're running Diablos. Stuff like that, or Loader's pylon can be generally pretty useful. But Flashbang, the chance is low. It really doesn't do that much. Overall, I think Flashbang is awful. Truly awful, if not. It might be the worst white item in the game, funnily enough. Well, maybe there's some DLC exceptions there, but... Next up, we have Fireworks, and there's really not much to say about Fireworks. Surprisingly effective with Remote Caffeinator, but not much else from that. It'll help occasionally. If you stack a lot of Fireworks, it can be really useful for clearing hordes, but overall, Fireworks just feels like a do-nothing item. I'm going to put it in C tier. Next up, we have Soda, or Energy Drink, as it's officially called. I always call it Soda, like the soda! That meme. But I think Soda is really solid. I really quite like Soda. It's not my first pick when it comes to speed, mainly because it doesn't affect you when you're not sprinting, but stacking it with other movement buffs is generally super useful. I really quite like it. Since it's not my first rate and it's situationally useful, not always useful, like all these ones up, and yeah, I'll put Slug at the top of B tier as well. Put this above it. Soda is useful. It stacks really well with other movement speed buffs because it makes you sprint. It makes your sprint faster, so it interacts really well with normal movement speed buffs. Overall, super useful. Next up, we have backup mags. Backup mags are character by character useful. Some like Loader, they're essential to have multiple grappling hooks. But on characters like Acrid, where the cooldown on his mouse 2 is so short, it may as well not exist. It basically does nothing. Oh, excuse me. Or on like Commando, Captain, whose mouse 2 really doesn't do that much. Backup mag is probably, again, it's a B tier item. It's situationally useful, depends on the survivor. For some, it's a game winner. For others, it just doesn't really do anything, which I think earns it this. Next up, we have Sticky Bomb. I'm not a fan of Sticky Bomb. I've never done like a crazy Sticky Bomb build. I've never really found a way to do that. I know that with Railgunner, it can be good to just gamble on the idea that the big shot will hit a Sticky Bomb, which will then hit insane damage, but yeah, I don't know. It really doesn't do much for me. It feels very similar to Firework, where it's just like an item that occasionally does things and often not that well. I often find with Sticky Bomb, it'll proc when I've already killed something, so the bomb doesn't really do anything. Next up, we have Rusted Key. Rusted Key, I think, is probably one of the weaker items, but not weak enough to put it down like at the bottom of C or D tier. Mainly just because 9 times out of 10 when you open your lockbox, you're just going to get a green item, and a lot of green items are pretty bad. So Rusted Key I don't think is anything special. I don't jump for joy when I get it, but it's useful. But it's effectively a 1-for-1 item trade. It's not like Sail Star, where Sail Star gets you extra items. This, you're just trading out an item that does nothing for an item that might do something, and even then, it's not guaranteed. Out of all the whites, it's one of my least favorites, but for the potential to get an extra red on round 2, it is definitely, I think, at least C tier. Probably right around here. AP rounds, absolutely fantastic. Never leave home without AP rounds. They're always usually a secondary damage item. I prefer to have, whether it be glasses, bleed, crowbar, something like that, and then AP rounds adds on multiplicatively to the damage increase from there, which can lead to huge benefits. Next up we have Topaz Brooch, which is an okay item in my opinion. Probably C tier again. It's useful in Forgive Me Please builds, just because when you get enough Gestures of the Drowned, you'll effectively be invincible, just because it will keep generating barrier faster than enemies can kill it, especially once you get 5 or 6 dolls down, or whatever it may be with Forgive Me Please. But on its own, it doesn't really do too much. You need to stack quite a few of it for it to be noticeable. I do like that it rewards you for playing aggressive, because that's when the game's at its most fun. If you start getting crazy multi-kills, you can get a decent barrier going, but you definitely need to stack Topaz Brooch before it really becomes anything of note. And for that, I think it ends up in C tier. Next up, we have Focus Crystal. This is also, I'm just going to skip straight to the point. This is going with the other damage items. Also, I'm going to move this one down. Focus Crystal, more multiplicative damage. Only really useful on certain survivors, like Railgunner's not going to be in kissing range of Mithrix for this to be activatable, or any enemy for that matter. But for units like Loader, Mercenary, why can't I think? Void Fiend, Acrid, Multi with nail guns, they'll all be right up in the enemy's grill, and this is just a nice damage bonus. Again, for the melee survivors, it's effectively just an always damage boost, which is super useful. Unconditional damage is fantastic, and it multiplies with the other damage buffers. Next up, we have Bison Steak. I'm going to put Bison Steak in D tier, probably above Flashbang, just because I think it gives you extra spikes with the Lost Sun, which at least puts it above Stun Grenade, in my opinion. But yeah, it's Bison Steak. Doesn't really do anything. I think it really deserves a rework, honestly. Next up, we have Repulsion Armor Plate. Now, this sees use mainly in, like, Hellfire Tincture builds. I've actually never done a Hellfire Tincture build just because it seems rather obtuse to get, because you have to get a Planula, which you can reliably only sometimes get on Stage 5 on Stage 5, or if you get a family event earlier. But yeah, it doesn't do that much. It falls off very quickly. It can be useful against things like Gunners, which are secretly very deadly, just because they hit you with so many low damage attacks. Reducing 5 damage on each of them is nice, but it's never something I go out of my way. Like, if I see a printer with this in it, I don't think I would ever hit that. It's just not particularly useful. I'm going to put it in C tier. Next up, White Scrap, since this is technically an item, is S tier because it can become any white item. Therefore, it is the best white item. Moving on. Now on to the Survivors of the Void. Now, the Survivors of the Void whites are are generally pretty good now that I think about it. I really think about it. Mocha. I'm going to put Mocha at the bottom of A tier, just because Mocha, as a drop, isn't particularly fantastic, though movement speed and attack speed is always good. But in a printer, it's effectively just 2 printers in one if you have just a couple whites to scrap, which can make it very high value to stack, just because, it's one item that does the job of both. But just getting it out of like a multi-shop or a chest is nice, though nothing really is too special, as it's obviously outclassed by its 2 full cousins, the Soldier Syringe and the Pulse Go Tooth. Next up, we have Delicate Watch. Again, more damage. Damage items are always fantastic. They will be the bedrock of your build. The reason I don't put them all in S tier is A, S tier would get very crowded, and B, again, I'm reserving S tier for items that make the most broken builds in the game. And that will usually be one sort of kingpin item that does it, not necessarily the items that it interacts with, in my opinion at least. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, Delicate Watch, very useful. It can lead to a bit of a brick wall effect, though. where you will get hit by one big attack, all your watches disappear and your damage drops off a cliff, and then you die because you can't do any damage. But just having a few watches, I wouldn't rely just on watches for damage because that is gambling. You'd be surprised how often you can get hit by something like an elite larva, for example, will hit you, all your watches are gone, and your run's effectively over. So don't just rely on watches. Have some sort of backup plan, whether it be Prion accumulator, royal capacitor, something like that to deal damage in the meantime while you rebuild your items. But yeah, delicate watch is really good. I can't deny that. Next up, roll of pennies is really, it's a top of D tier item. It doesn't do much. It can be useful in the early game to interact with fire elites. Just by walking into their trails, you'll get a bunch of money. But it falls off basically after stage like 2. There's a much better items for making extra money, and overall it just really doesn't do that much and is very weak in general, in my opinion. Next up we have Power Elixir. Now Power Elixir is it's sort of like a poor man's Dios, while also offering insurance against your watches getting broken, which is very useful because this will activate before your watches will break. Which means if I'm running a lot of watches, I like to have at least a few Power Elixirs, really, just in case things go sideways, which they very often can in Risk of Rain. But overall, I don't think it's really anything to write home about aside from that. I'm going to put it at the bottom of B tier just because it helps with a very good item in the watches. But it doesn't do too much else outside that, because even with the massive heal, I have been killed through Power Elixir before. It just pops my Power Elixir, and then I get hit with the same attack, and I'm dead. That's how it goes sometimes. Or I'm fighting something like a Wandering Vagrant. I'm already at low health. I get hit by a Wisp or something. My Power Elixir pops, and then I get blasted by the Vagrant and die anyways. But still, mainly just as insurance for watches, it's very useful. Next up, Opal. I quite like Opal, personally. I'm going to put it at the top of B tier, just because you won't be getting hit very often if you're playing well, in general, and having the first hit you take be negated effectively, because you'll have just huge damage reduction, is super useful. Also pairs really well with safer spaces, and in general is just a nice survivability buff because, again, you won't be getting hit often if you're playing well, and when you do get hit, you won't take almost any damage. It can lead to a situation where you'll feel invincible until, of course, something happens in 0.32 seconds where you are dead before you even realize what's going on. You'll be at full health and then immediately dead, because one-shot protection doesn't exist. It's a myth. And with that, we're on to Seekers of the Storm. Now, the Seekers of the Storm Whites don't have the best reputation, though I'm not going to argue that, though I don't necessarily dislike them. I will say, what is this? Something Echoes? Warped Echoes, that's what it is. Warped Echoes I don't like. I am going to put this one probably in D tier, probably around like Flashbang, mainly just because it's an item that feels like it doesn't do much. With certain builds, I think it actually could be very interesting, something like Gestures of the Drowned and Demon Fruit. What's the fruit called? The one that heals you for 50% of your health. So Gestures, Fruit, and Echoes, just because you'll be healing like every second for most of your health, and any damage you take will be greatly reduced by this, and will just be healed off, and then the second wave of damage will be healed off again. But that's a very niche use, and in general, I don't find it particularly useful. Next up, Chronic Expansion. Now, I don't know what the opinion on Chronic Expansion is, but I love Chronic Expansion. It rewards you for playing aggressively, which is great. And also, with Forgive Me Please, it is the easiest god build in the game. Just get some Gestures of the Drowned, Forgive Me Please, and Chronic Expansion. Run around the map for 3 minutes, and you will be doing so much damage that bosses will be killed in one shot, almost no matter what survivor you're playing. It is one of the easiest items to break, and I do kind of love it for that. Though on its own, it's just sort of a fine item. This is too high up for it, though, because it really only comes into its own with Forgive Me Please. However, I do love the design of the item and want to see more like that when we get next DLC pack, whenever that may be. Next, Knockback Fin. Knockback Fin is a funny item, and that at least gives it some bonus points. You'll definitely know you have it, especially if you're playing someone that shoots rapidly, because then it leads to you sending wisps to the moon every time you shoot at them, which is very funny. Though it doesn't do too much aside from that. I'm probably going to put it sort of in this tier where it's not detrimental, it doesn't hurt you, but it's not going to win you the game. I imagine it has more use on people like Railgunner who can struggle if they get swarmed. Just having extra ways to get enemies off you is generally useful. Next up, we have Bolstering Lantern. Now, Bolstering Lantern is, again, it's going to fall into this tier, sort of the do-nothing tier, because, A, you generally don't want to be at low health, but I suppose getting a big damage buff when you are is a good incentive, and I'm sure there's someone out there that knows how to turn Bolstering Lantern into, like, a permanent damage buff just by, managing your health just right, which, in that case, I think it has, a place as a fun item, but it's really only useful as just like it's useful. This is something I haven't really thought of, but I've definitely noticed in game. When you're low health in a boss fight, usually in like stage 1 or 2, where you don't quite have the capabilities to heal in a fight, so you run off to the side to go heal. This is useful for getting rid of those enemies that maraud at you, because you'll be doing more damage, and will in general be very useful for that mainly. Not much else aside from that though. What is this? Reflection Antlers? I don't think that's what they're called, but it's what they are. So you have a chance to reflect damage back at the attacker. Similar to the others, just doesn't do too much. But it is funny. Gives your guys horns. So I like that. I'm actually going to move Fireworks up. But it just doesn't do much. It could occasionally kill a wisp or something like that if you get lucky. But yeah, doesn't do much. I don't find it to be like a completely dead item. I know you would think that the do-nothings would end up in D tier, but in D tier, weirdly, I find it's items that do things, but they're things that aren't very useful. Where the ones up here are more just useful in niche situations, which is a weird thing, but I guess it may just speak to how I play that I don't find these almost any use outside of PSG with Plasma Shrimp. But with that, I believe we've covered every common item in the game. There definitely will be, of course, follow-up parts to this, covering the rest of the tiers, and then we will do a big compilation video as well, I think. Let me know what you think down below. I know I was rather conservative with my S tiers. I probably could have bumped, leg, and some of the other A tiers up to S tier, but I'm trying to be restrained with my S tier picks, personally. Anyways, been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and we're doing the second part on my Risk of Rain 2 items tier list video. Of course, we ranked all of the common items last time, and now we're going to rank all of the uncommon items, including the ones from Survivors of the Void. Now, eventually I'll have to update this, given the roadmap that Gearbox put out, so a lot of these items will get reworked. But we'll get there when we get there, won't we? For now, we're going to be ranking these on their current strength and seeing how where I would rank them. First up, we got ATG. I think ATG, absolutely, right at the top of A tier. I'm going to put right behind Paul's Goat Leg, mainly just because ATG is a little bit survivor dependent. It's good on just about everyone, but something like Dual Nail Gun Multi, it's not quite as standout in my opinion. But in general, ATG is of course an absolute classic item. Great on people like Loader, Railgunner, Captain, really anyone that has a burst attack, Rebar, Multi, because Multi is the best. Next up we have Will-O-The-Wisp. Will-O-The-Wisp I'm going to put right next to Gasoline. Mainly because usually these items occupy the same space in my mind. They're extra horde clearing. They're good with. They're very good with. What's it called? I can't even think. Forgive me, please. And overall are both very solid items. They are helpful again for mainly clearing hordes. And that's no different with Will-O-The-Wisp. You can create some crazy chains with this going off. If you kill a big horde of enemies, once you kill one, the rest just fall. It's really satisfying. Love to use it. Opal Feather, right up here, right right above Goat Leg. I'm going to put it above Goat Leg because it's a really unique item in that it gives you a second jump, and that jump is super useful to survive in this game. A lot of attacks tend to be grounded or close to the ground, so being able to jump over them and do it more efficiently is huge to survival. Invaluable against Mithrix, pretty useful, and also super useful in the mid phases of the Voidling, and especially for dealing with the False Sun, even though he's getting a rework. Hopos will be useful because that one's very much like a up-front fight, you know. Next up, Ukulele. I'm going to put Ukulele right next to ATG, mainly because, in my mind, again, these items are very similar, but they just fulfill the same role but a little differently. ATG helps you with your single target on a chance. Ukulele helps you with your horde on a chance. Both are fantastic items. I love having them in any run. Doesn't matter who I'm playing. Getting a ukulele is just super useful, especially if you're playing a burst survivor. It can just be invaluable to hit a crazy ukulele chain to then just help clear out the hordes after you punch something real hard. Next up, Leeching Seed. Now, unfortunately, Leeching Seed is pretty bead. It's not like an active detriment, so it's not going in F tier, but I am going to put it like right next to Monster Tooth just because it's such a like do-nothing item. Especially with Harvester's Scythe existing in the game, there's very little reason to use Leeching Seed, even if getting it can give you a lot of regen with someone like Void Fiend or Multi with nail guns. Again, it's just completely outclassed by Harvester's Scythe, which gives you a second effect as well as more healing than the Leeching Seed. Next up, Predatory Instincts. I love Predatory Instincts. I'm probably going to put it right around sort of like the Chronic Expansion sort of area. It's very satisfying to use, and crit chance is just... If an item has crit chance, chances are it's very good. And I don't think that's any different for our friend Predatory Instincts. Also, it looks funny, so that's a benefit. Red Whip. This is an item that I used to hate, but I have grown to love Red Whip. I'm not going to put it all the way up in A tier, but I'm going to put it like right next to Soda, but I think it's better than Soda. Red Whip is just so useful as a big speed boost when you're looting, when you're escaping enemies. Red Whip is just really useful in general, and I love to have one whenever I'm doing a run, especially if I'm looping. Red Whip is so important to get those stages done as fast as possible, and Red Whip overall, just fantastic movement item. Old War Stealth Kit is just an absolute do-nothing item. It's like, I guess it's a good way to know that you're probably about to die, but yeah, it's just an item that really doesn't do anything. I'm going to put it like right around here, the sort of items that are okay but really don't do much for you or scale poorly into the late game. Harvester's Scythe, I'm going to put this right below these guys. Gives you 5% crit chance, and crits heal you for flat, 8? It heals you for 4, and then each stack gives you an extra 4, and the first one counts, so it gives you 8 health on a crit. I think that's how Harvester's Scythe work. I might be getting that math mixed up a little bit. But Harvester's Scythe, really love having a Harvester's Scythe, especially on characters that want crit, which is all of them. It's just super useful. It helps you stay in the fight longer, and that's the most important thing, is sustaining your longevity in a fight. Of course, it does lose value on people like Railgunner Loader? Is that her name? Yeah, Loader. Why am I forgetting? Why does that not sound right? You know, big punch. I'm going to look this up on my other monitor, but I'm pretty sure it's Loader. Yeah, Loader. Yeah, I'm not sure why I was freaking out there for a minute. I quite like Harvester's Scythe, though, even though it isn't necessarily the best on those characters. I tend to prefer more sustained survivors anyways, so Harvester's Scythe works great. Fuel Cell, absolutely, definitely going right up here. Probably put it just below, like, the main damage item. Yeah, I'll put it, like, right next to Predatory Instincts. It's a rare day where I don't want a Fuel Cell unless I'm doing something like Crowdfunder, which is, of course, a very fun equipment that doesn't have a cooldown. But this is so instrumental in a lot of builds, whether it be Royal Capacitor spam, Forgive Me Please, is even something like Vase or Wings. It can be super useful, or Eccentric Vase and Milky Chrysalis are super useful just to help you skip pillars faster, get around the map faster, get to the soups faster on the moon. Overall, super fantastic. There's not much to say about it. Infusion, I'm gonna put it probably like right at the top of C tier. Like Infusion's fine. It's just kind of, a little bit of extra health. On some survivors, it doesn't really matter. On some, it's more impactful. It doesn't really help that much with overall survivability. It doesn't scale very well into the late game, but I never turned down an Infusion. So, Bandolier, do nothing item. It has some uses on, like, Loader, but her cooldowns are so short anyways, it doesn't really matter. Bandolier's just green scrap in my opinion. It really doesn't do much, and I honestly wish it got some sort of rework. Bandolier I don't think is very good. Berserker Pauldron is pretty solid in my opinion. I'm going to put Berserker Pauldron probably like at the bottom of B tier. Berserker Pauldron I think is a solid item. It's really good with Forgive Me Please because it's effectively then just a permanent speed and attack speed bonus, and when it goes off you feel it. It really is a big boost. And overall, I quite like it. I think it's useful, scales well into the end game, especially when you're looping and there's always 40 enemies on stage. You'll have, almost endless kills to keep this thing going. And overall, I quite like Berserker Pauldron. Rose Shield it's all right. I'm gonna put it probably, I'll put it like around Berserker Pauldron. They're fairly useful, just not the most impactful. I quite like stacking Rose Pauldrons, or Rose Shields if I can, just to get, more armor. It's really useful to stop you from getting sniped. It helps a little bit when you're getting surprise attacked, especially against things like golem beams, like if they lock onto you in an awkward way and then by the time you realize it's too late, having that extra armor can be impactful to make sure you don't die. And in general, it's just a useful survivability item that never is a detriment to have. The two bands, Renald and Jaro's band, are fantastic items. I'm gonna put them in S tier. These are our next S tiers. Obviously, they are just huge. Both of them are so good. They weirdly complement each other rather well. And while there are some survivors that can struggle to activate them, most of them can find a way to do it. And when you do, it can be impactful. Obviously, slightly better on burst survivors, just given how it works. But I mean, you never want to leave home without a band. And any survivor, it's super useful extra damage. They can really make or break runs at times. Having that extra damage can be so impactful. Love the bands, they're so good. Chronobauble is fairly mediocre in my opinion. I'm going to put this just above Infusion. Chronobauble, though, I think is at the same time like mediocre, but its job is always useful, and weirdly I think it's better as time goes on, as you're facing more elites, more flying enemies. Keeping them under control and corralled can be useful, and it is very good against, Mithrix, just because Mithrix's main attribute is his speed. Remember what he said? Speed is war. You generally want to have some sort of way to interrupt his movements, because getting Mithrix jump scared is not exactly what you want, because one-shot protection will not save you from his hammer. So having a way to keep him a little slower, very useful. But it's just sort of an item that's the same power level pretty much always, though is useful to have at least one copy of. Wax Quail, this is going to be controversial. Easy S tier. I love Wax Quails. This is mainly a meme between me and my friend, but Wax Quails goated. In all seriousness, though, Wax Quails are super useful just to help with the dodging game. Fantastic on Loader. I like to stack like 10 of these on Loader just because of the insane acceleration that applies to you once you press space. So when you're charging that punch up, press space and then just let go, and you will be moving at faster than the speed of light. And it's really funny, and it sits on your head. Wax Quail's goated. Love Wax Quail. Rusty Guillotine, or Old Guillotine, I think it is Old Guillotine, is a solid enough item. It sort of falls into this tier where Pauldron, Shield, and, well, now Guillotine are, where they're useful to have, but they generally aren't the most impactful. Can really come in clutch against, like, elite bosses, especially things like elite Wandering Vagrants if they're if they're overloading, if they're frost, they are so bulky it can feel like it takes 15 minutes to kill one of those bosses. And being able to kill them at 15% HP is a small but very meaningful difference. Guillotine's solid though, really good on Railgunner too, just to help with the one-shot game. Like Guillotine plus Crowbar with Railgunner is basically a one-hit on elites at all times. Warhorn, I quite like Warhorn. I'm gonna put it like probably at the top tier of B tier. Warhorn is very solid with a lot of equipment spam builds, whether that be Spinal Tonic or Forgive Me Please or Royal Capacitor or Gorag's Opus, Monkey Fruit, or not Monkey Fruit, what is it called? Strange Fruit? I always call it the Monkey Fruit. What is it? The one that heals you for 50%. If you want to go for like the immortality build, if you will. Warhorn is just always useful. It gives you a big attack speed bonus, which is good. Leptons. Unfortunately, Leptons is not Sleptons. I think I have a higher opinion of Leptons than most people do, mainly because it's useful if you get it stage 1 and you do Void Fields. It can make or break your Void Fields run depending on what enemies you get. If it's an easy run, doesn't matter, it's free green scrap. If it's a tough run, having those heals can be super useful. Overall, though, it's a do-nothing item, really. I'm going to put it above Bandolier, because I like it more than... And I'm going to put it above Sticky Bomb. Next up, Razor Wire. I know Razor Wire has a use in... not Spinal Tonic, because that's the one that makes you super strong. What's it called? Hellfire Tincture. This has a use with Hellfire Tincture and Planula, if I'm not mistaken, is how you do that. Where you just make like an infinite feedback loop of healing yourself and making damage AoE. But overall, I don't think Razor Wire is particularly useful. I guess it can be good against things like Wisps if they get really close to you, but I mean, that's kind of a wishful thinking. Gore's Tome is, it's a fine item. I'll put it like up here where it's just kind of whatever. It's really only useful for like the first 4 stages. And especially not after looping, because once you loop, you're getting, you'll look up at your money 3 seconds into a stage and it'll have like $15,000. So yeah, not great. Squid Polyp is good. I actually think Squid Polyp is a slept-on item. I'm going to put this in A tier. Now, this may seem insane. You may think, well, what? How could this be an A tier? Remote Caffeinator. Get a few Squid Polyps and Remote Caffeinator. Easiest Mithrix boss fight in the game. It is insane how easy it is to just cheese Mithrix with Squid Polyp. And it's funny because you get a bunch of little squid guys. Get some of those Gestures of the Drowned, and you will be laughing all the way to the bank. It is so fun. Squid Polyp is just weirdly powerful. It really is. For a long time, I didn't like it. Deathmark, I'm going to put this alongside Warhorn. With the right situations, really useful. I'm actually going to pump Red Whip up above these guys, just because Red Whip is always useful. And I'm actually going to put him with Backup Mag as well, because Backup Mag is very Survivor dependent. Deathmark, very solid with people like, False Sun, he can apply debuff, can he? Chef appreciates it. Oh god, who am I thinking of? Wow, why can't I think? There's someone I'm thinking of that I can't remember the name of. I suppose Artificer can apply some debuffs. Bandit can apply some debuffs. So that gets you most of the way there. And then, once you get a death mark off, it can snowball really quickly into death. So that's all the base game greens. We need to move on to the DLC greens, which I'm not particularly high on. Hunter's Harpoon, awful. It's alright in late game Forgive Me Please, because you'll have enough gestures where you're always throwing out, what is it called, the little dolls, so you'll always be getting the speed boost, but most of the time just uncontrollable nightmare. Shurikens, I hate Shurikens. I hate Shurikens so much. Even if I'm playing someone like Loader, who has no ranged attacks, pretty much, I don't want Shurikens. I hate Shurikens. Super inaccurate. They can proc bans, so I'll put them at the bottom of D tier, but I hate Shurikens so much. shipping request form is alright. I'm going to put it around here. It can be really funny. If you get like 6 of these on a looping run, you'll start snowballing reds really fast, which is really fun. But it's just free items, and free items are good. Regen scrap, absolutely an A tier item. Probably at the bottom of A tier though. It's just really useful and can, again, snowball into free reds pretty quickly once you start going to Mithrix, False Sun, any place where you can exchange greens for reds. Regen scrap is useful. Then finally, we have Ignition Tank. I'm quite high on Ignition Tank. I'm going to put it here. Really good on Chef. Also, anyone that likes to use gasoline. This is almost essential for that to work late game. Good on if you want to use Flamethrower on Artificer. This is absolutely essential to making that work. And in general, I think it's a quite solid item. I love Ignition Tank. And then we're on to Survivors of the Storm, or not Survivors. What? I'm mixing the names up. Seekers of the Storm. Now, a lot of these are getting a rework. In fact, all of them except Sailstar are. And I think that's not without reason. First up, we have Chance Doll. And this is a do-nothing item. I still like it more than Shurikens. Yeah, it's a do-nothing item that really doesn't help your run particularly. Prayer Beads is just green scrap. I'm going to put it like in the same position. I just hate Shurikens. Luminous Charge. I actually don't mind Luminous Charge. I'm going to put it at like sort of probably like lower, like sort of lower upper C tier, you know what I'm saying? Mid C tier, I suppose. Upper mid C tier. It's quite good on certain survivors, and by certain I mean one survivor. It's really good on Railgunner, because you're constantly using your mouse 2 and then your mouse 1, so just free extra damage. Honestly, I wouldn't mind Luminous Charge staying the way it is, but maybe making it a bit more survivor universal would be good. Sailstar, this is an easy S tier item. It's just free items. If you get this stage 1, you're looking at a minimum 4 extra items, which can be huge. Even more if you go to Void Fields. Sailstar's fantastic. There's not a person alive who doesn't love Sailstar. Next up, we have Unstable Transmitter. Now, I don't hate Unstable Transmitter, but it does commit one cardinal sin, and that is it can doom runs in Void Fields. Outside of that, I'm fine with it. I think it's a good get-out-of-jail-free card, so I'm going to put it above Stealth Kit. Because, if you're... Again, it's just a get-out-of-jail-free card. In Void Fields, absolute death sentence. Don't pick it up. Outside of that, I'm fine with it. I don't mind having one. It's kind of like a power elixir. I just like to keep it in my back pocket in case things go sideways. Very solid. And then we have Noxious Thorn, which is just another do-nothing item, really. Yeah, it's just a do-nothing item. I can apply some debuffs, but not in a very consistent way. So, it's nothing. It's just green scrap, like a lot of these lower-tier greens are. And that's all the greens except for green scrap itself, which I'm actually going to put in, like, A tier, I think. Just because you can scrap these for reds. I think green scrap, if that isn't a thing, like if you're going to the Voidling, green scrap is probably the worst scrap in the game. Because green items you generally don't want to stack outside of the ones that are in the top tiers. And even then, it's not the most impactful to stack them. Yeah, it's just not that impactful outside of the fact that you get free reds with it. And I believe that's all the green or uncommon items, if you will, out of the way. So, what do we have left? We have red items, yellow items, lunar items, and equipment, and void items. Well, I will get around to those eventually, and I will see you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to the next part in our long little Risk of Rain 2 tier list series that we're doing. And of course, next up we do have the boss tier of items that we're going to cover today. So boss items are generally not the most well-loved. They tend to cover the entire gambit from some of the more meaningless items in the game to some of the more powerful items in the game. but it's very case by case. So starting up, we have Titanic Knurl. So Titanic Knurl gives you 40 extra health and increases your health regen by, I think it's 1.5 health per second, if I'm not mistaken. It's something similar to that. So Titanic Knurl, I think, is a fine item. It's probably going to end up sort of around the tier of like Bungus and Cautious Slug, because it's honestly very similar to them. It offers consistent health regen, which is very useful on the higher difficulties. I know that on Eclipse 8, regenerating health is effectively not a thing, but I'm talking about for the wider game at large. This can be very effective, especially on characters that have naturally very low health regen, like Multi, or even Loader, for example. Overall, Titanic Knurl, though, fairly, it's fine, but it just kind of sits there. It's not a very flashy item. Next up, we have Queen's Gland, Beetle Guard, as I like, or just BGs. This gives you a Beetle Guard that will follow you around and fight things for you. Probably not the most impactful item in the game. I'm probably going to put it right at the top of C tier. I do really like Beetle Gland just because I like having a little Beetle Guard with me. And honestly, that on its own is more than enough for me to, put it up here with the funny items. And it can be more helpful on some survivors than others. For example, I quite like it when I'm playing like Railgunner, just so it's harder for things like Jerboas to sneak up on me. Though on super mobile survivors, it will be hard for the Beetle Guard to keep up with you, so he'll just kind of be lagging around. But it's, he's a funny little guy to have around, and that is in itself worthy of some points. Next up, we have the Aurelionite item. I actually can't remember the name of this one. Aurelionite is pretty solid, pretty similar to Beetle Guard, but I'm probably going to put it a tier up, probably like around these items. Just because, well, actually no, I'm going to bump it up because she also helps in the final stage of Mithrix. I'll bump it up to maybe like right above, like here, right next to. I feel very similar to it as I do to Titanic Knurl. Aurelionite is really, she's really solid. She's a huge, beefy bullet sponge. She does pretty solid damage when she hits things. She's got the laser. She's effectively a Stone Titan on your side, but she has the big row of punches, which can be pretty useful. And it's just useful to keep pressure off you, especially if you're running something like Focused Convergence. It's super useful to just have Aurelionite there to take the heat off, so it's easier to stay in your increasingly smaller charge bubble. But she's not gonna, she's not gonna change the world or anything. Next up, we have, Little Disciples. Little Disciples is really solid. Like, really solid. I'm probably going to put it up around here, just because it effectively gives you, almost like a toxic gas cloud that follows you around. If you're unaware of what Little Disciples does, while you're sprinting, it shoots off homing projectiles towards nearby enemies. And they do pretty solid damage. It's like 300% damage, if I'm not mistaken, or it might be even more than that. But it's really useful just for crowd control, keeping yourself safe, and is invaluable when you're escaping a bad situation, just because, when you are running from a big fight, it is often something like a wisp or something hitting you with an attack you didn't expect that could kill you. So having this as that extra benefit and extra way of dealing damage is just generally useful. There's not a survivor it's bad on, but I'm not going to say Little Disciples is going to make your run or anything like that. First up, we have Normal Pearl. So you get this for sacrificing a lunar item to a cleansing pool, which are very rare. And it gives you, 5% health? It's not particularly useful. I suppose it's good if you just need to get rid of a lunar item. It could be a nice benefit. But I'm probably going to just put it next to Infusion, because honestly, they're basically the same thing. Normal Pearl isn't very good, though. Irradiant Pearl. Is that what that's called? Iridescent Pearl? Something like that. This item is very good because this gives you the same stat buff, but to all of your stats. Damage, movement, speed, all that stuff. And, that's just a very solid, a flat boost to your just base power level is super good, obviously. And I'm not going to say that it's not, because it isn't. This is a very, very solid item. Though it is exceedingly hard to get. I believe it's about, 1 in 10 chances, or is it 1 in 20? It might be 1 in 20 chances to get this out of a cleansing pool. In fact, I think I've only ever seen it maybe twice. That's because I don't pick up lunar items very often. I'm probably going to put it probably around like the red utility tier. Just because, it's really solid. It's always on. Molten Perforator. Molten Perforator, I'm putting this up here with the goated damage items. Molten Perforator is really, really good on pretty much every survivor. So long as you get it to proc, it is super good, and it just unleashes a lot of extra damage. And it also looks cool because it shoots off these lava rocks. You get this from the Magma Worm, which is a pretty annoying boss fight. But Magma Perforator, is that what it's called? Because I know the charged one is Charged Perforator, so I presume this is Magma Perforator or something along those lines. It's just a really solid item. When on hit, there's a chance that it just sends out a bunch of explosive rocks that do a lot of damage. Very useful late game, just because of how often you'll be training huge groups of enemies. You can set off a huge chain of Molten Perforators, and it will do a lot of damage. So it's good, and also looks cool. Next up, we have Shatter Spleen. Wait, now that I'm looking at this list... there it is. It's down here. Okay. We have Shatter Spleen, and Shatter Spleen, you get this from Imp Overlord. I'm going to put this right next to, but above, Tri-Tip Dagger. Shatter Spleen is really good. It gives you guaranteed bleed on crits, and bleeding enemies explode. So it effectively is another form of crowd control because of the explosion. Very similar to like Gasoline or Will-O-the-Wisp. And obviously crits guaranteed bleeding is very good. Mainly on rapid attack survivors. Multi, Commando, or Void Fiend, for example, all really love having Shatter Spleen, and even someone like Railgunner, who has guaranteed crits. Wait, did I say Railgunner? Yeah, Railgunner has guaranteed crits. Can really appreciate this just because of how bleed works. And Shatter Spleen is just solid. It's extra crowd control and more consistent bleeding, which is really useful, and is something that you can pretty much always count on if you get it. Mired Urn is okay. It's not the most useful. Basically what it does is, when it activates, it selects a target near you and starts draining for health. You get this from the Clay Dunestrider, which, this is basically its suck attack, but for you. It is a nice bit of extra health regen, very useful on brawler survivors like Acrid or, what's her face? Loader, for example, or Buzzsaw. Multi really appreciates this. But I'm probably going to put it down around, I'll bump it up to the bottom of B tier, just because it can be useful if you're low on health and there's just a beetle running around. You can sap it for a good amount of health. Gloop, Genesis Loop, rather, is from the Wandering Vagrants, one of the scourges of early game runs. And it effectively gives you their explosive attack, right? When they start to charge up and unleash that big shockwave. It gives that to you when you're below 30% HP. Which is fine. It's not something you can really count on, though it can be a handy little get-out-of-jail card. And when it does go off, it does do a lot of damage, unsurprisingly. But there is a wind-up time to it, right? So once you drop to that health prerequisite, it starts to charge, and then it finally unleashes the attack after, I think it's maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and does a huge shockwave of damage. Overall, pretty solid item, but it's kind of going to go into this, not necessarily a do-nothing tier, but sort of a, it's an item that doesn't do that much, but it can, at times, be useful. Okay, where are the rest of the gold items? Here we go. So, Charged Perforator, Churforator, as me and my friends call it, is even better than Molten Perforator. What it does is, instead of sending out the explosive rocks, it calls down the lightning strikes you see from electric worms, or overloading worms. And it's just more consistent damage, and it's really good. I think it does do a little bit more damage, but I'm not too familiar with it. It's a generally pretty rare item to get, because you, A, need to get deep enough into a run where overloading worms can spawn, and you need to get it to spawn, which is still not guaranteed. And then, not only do you have to kill the thing, which is not necessarily the easiest, that's one of the more powerful enemies, in my opinion, but then you have to get lucky on the 15% chance for this to drop. But still, it's a fantastic item. It does a lot of damage. It just helps in general. Anything Molten Perforator does, Charged Perforator does, but better. Planula. So Planula, for the most part, is pretty mediocre. So what it does is when you take damage, you heal for 15 health. This is useful mainly against things like Clay Templars, the minigun guys. I always call them gunners. Because they'll be hitting you so rapidly, you'll usually out-heal their damage, though that only works in the early game. And since you can only get this on one stage unless you get a family event, if I'm not mistaken, it's really hard to get Planula, because you have to fight grandparents, which only spawn on the Sky Meadows. Is that what it's called? The purple stage. And I believe they also spawn on Worm Hatchery, Brothers Respite, the new Stage 5. But still, they are not the most common bosses, and then you also have to get lucky on this. I do know that Planula mainly sees use in Hellfire Tincture, which is one of the last builds that I haven't done. I really should try out Hellfire Tincture. But it's very difficult to set up, mainly because you pretty much have a very low chance to get this on every loop you do, and you kind of need it for Hellfire Tincture to work properly. Which means I don't want to put it at the bottom of B tier, but I'm going to put it right around these greens, which are situationally useful. Planula, nothing special. And then, yes. So this is from John Construct, or the G Construct. I just call him John Construct. And this item's awful. It's truly abominable. I'm probably going to put it above Hunter's Harpoon just because of it doesn't, it can't actively hurt you. But what this does is when you kill an elite, you summon up a Sentinel Construct. Is that what they're called? The triangle guys. I always call them Shungites. It summons one of those. It does a little bit more damage, and it shoots at things for a little while. But it doesn't scale particularly well into the late game, and overall it's just kind of pointless. You have to kill an elite, which in and of itself isn't necessarily the most difficult, but it's not super easy. And you just get a sort of mediocre companion that can't move. So say you just take out an elite on one side of the map, and then one of the teleporters elsewhere. It's not going to help you at all, because the Shungite is just going to sit over there and do nothing for 30 seconds. Yeah, this item sucks. And then we have Gold Scrap, which... Gold Scrap is probably going to go, right beside Radiant Pearl. Just because it's really only use that I can think of, because most gold items you don't really want to stack, is just getting extra perforators. Which, again, you need to get multiple golds that you can scrap, and then get a gold printer that also happens to be one of the perforators, which is not exactly common. I maybe see a gold printer maybe once every 25 runs, and it's usually nothing good. Anyways, I have been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. We covered all the boss items. Oh, wait. Oh, how could I forget? Friendship Cores? That's not it. Duality Cores, I believe is what these are called. This summons up 2 Solus Probes, which are the mini things that Solus control units fart out. And these things are pretty dang good, in my opinion. Great companion items to have. Better than, honestly, Beetle Guard, even Aurelian, I would still put these guys above her. I'd probably put it right next to Colonel Drone Man. So the way these things work, they have their beam attack, which does, solid damage, but the main thing that really cranks the companion cores to the max is for every ally on your team, they do an additional 100% damage. So they can, if you're running a lot of drones, especially someone on Captain, they can do a lot of damage very fast. You have to be careful if Mithrix gets them, but that can be true of a lot of items. They're overall super, super useful, and one of my favorite gold items to get. So honestly, should I bump them up? I keep them next to Drone Man. Because they're a little bit situational, right? You do need like on their own they're fine, but they generally want some extra help. So that's all the gold items. I hope you enjoyed this part of the tier list. Next up, we're going to do the lunar items. Then we have the equipments, and finally the void items. And then we'll be done, and we can move on to something else. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are on to the next part of the Risk of Rain tier list. We've been here before. Let's just get to it. We're almost done. We got the equipments up next. So equipments are obviously a special type of item. They fill up a slot on your character and generally have some sort of powerful effect, high damage output, disruption, mobility, whatever it may be. Again, this tier list is mainly based on my personal opinion. I know if you want to math it out, I may not exactly be right, but this is off of what I generally do. Let's get into it. So first things first, DML. Rock solid equipment. Mainly with ICBM, so I'm probably going to drop it down to around here. I think DML is just, it's really solid. Obviously, fires off 12 homing rockets that'll do pretty consistent damage. It's useful for horde clearing. It's useful for single target damage if you just get really close to a boss. And activate DML, the rockets launched will go straight into the boss, especially on things like Wandering Gravrant or Soulless Control Unit. Overall, I quite enjoy the DML. It's just solid, rock solid. Foreign Fruit is not very good, in my opinion. It is funny, though, which definitely earns it some points. I'll probably drop it around the funny reds. The main reason I put it there is just because if you get enough Gestures of the Drowned, you'll be healing 50% of your max HP every second, which can make it very hard for those Risk of Rain 2 moments where, even though you're at full health, you get hit and instantly die. This, drastically reduces that because you could simply heal back the damage as soon as you take it, and it does feel rather fun to be effectively immortal when it comes to taking damage. Also makes things like Blaze Elites or Mushrooms a lot less annoying to fight. Black Hole is, again, rock solid equipment. It just groups enemies up, and more useful on some survivors than others. The ones that come to mind, Railgunner, Loader really enjoy it, but everyone can use it not only as a get-off-me tool, but just to group enemies up. It makes, explosives more effective. It makes, if you're playing Commando with his piercing mouse too, obviously, super useful. Group everyone up, hit him with the mouse too. It'll do a lot of damage to whoever hits that last. And I think it's just overall, really solid. I quite like Black Hole, or what is it called, like Portable Darkness Cube or something like that. I would just call it Black Hole, right? Ocular HUD is probably more of like a fine sort of tier item, where it has its uses, but I generally don't find it the most useful. It can give you potentially permanent crit via Gestures of the Drowned, which wouldn't be too hard as its cooldown's not super long. But it's not what I would consider the most useful equipment. It's fine, totally middle of the road. Remember, if something's in B tier, doesn't mean it's bad, just means that it's generally overshadowed. The backup is not very good. The backup's main use is just with, like, Colonel Drone Man and Captain, just to give you more projectile shields, because the drones themselves are fine, but it's on a monstrously long cooldown, which is its main downside. It's like, 110 seconds before you can use it again. Of course, the drones do last for 60 seconds, assuming they don't die. But without Colonel Drone Man, this may as well be a dead equipment slot. Prion Accumulator is really solid. This is one of the sort of Mithrix cheese equipments that I like to use. When he's stealing your items, right near the end of that sequence, just shoot out a Prion Accumulator, and it will generally hit him hard enough to give you a lot of your items back and make the rest of that phase a cakewalk, which I think earns it a slightly higher place. I'm going to put it up around here. I quite like Prion's super long cooldown, but it hits hard enough that I generally don't mind. Milky Chrysalis is pretty solid. I'm going to put it like right near Red Whip, honestly, because it's sort of the equipment form of Red Whip. It's a slightly context-dependent speed boost. It gives you free pillar skip on pretty much every character. I don't think there's a single character that's slow enough to where they can't skip pillars with Milky Chrysalis. But It's not a flashy equipment. It can be fun though. You can kind of make a sort of like attack helicopter build with like multi, which doesn't really do anything, but it does look cool, just kind of hovering around like a gunship and shooting at your enemies, which is fun. Royal Capacitor. This is probably going to be our first S tier equipment. Royal Capacitor, super good, hits super hard, super short cooldown. This is the easiest Mithrix cheese equipment. As soon as he's done stealing your items, hit him with Royal Capacitor. He'll probably lose like 70% of his health and give you most of your items back. Royal Capacitor, just super, super useful. Big damage, fast cooldown. It's pretty... I believe it can miss in very specific circumstances, but against most enemies, it's effectively perfectly accurate. And it's really good. One of my favorite equipments in terms of damage equipments, that is. Crowdfunder. I'm going to put this right next to Prions. Crowdfunder is mainly a personal thing, the reason I like it so much. It's really good with the Brittle Crown, funnily enough, because it becomes self-sustaining very rapidly. And I tend to quite like sustained characters. So, for example, say I'm playing multi with dual nail guns. Give him a big Crowdfunder, and then you basically just get a third version of your nail guns, which A, looks cool, and B, is very effective. Because the Railgunner, the Crowdfunder does a lot of damage once it gets fully wrapped up. Really like the Crowdfunder, but it is slightly dependent on use case, but I think it's still worth putting it there. This is Gnarled Wood Sprite. And Gnarled Wood Sprite is totally fine. I'm going to put it right next to Foreign Fruit. It's just another form of healing. It is nice that you can give it to your allies. And I think that does at least give it some use as just a fairly middling equipment, but it's just not something I ever really consistently run. And there's really not much to say about it. There's no real strats that revolve around Gnarled Wood Sprite that I could even theorize about. Radar Scanner is pretty awful. Without mods, it doesn't actually reveal that much. And even with it's such a brief reveal of everything on the map that finding things is not super easy. Only reason that I kind of like Radar Scanner is to help with finding very hard to find like newt altars. And even then, it can still get lost in the mix of just trying to find the question mark among the sea of other question marks. Yeah, not great. Next up, Eccentric Vase. This is just the pillar skip equipment. I'm going to put it right next to Milski Chrysalis. It has almost no uses outside of that. There's specific maps, like Aphelion Sanctuary, where it's useful to get to the frog statue if it's out of reach. But most of the time, it's completely pointless until you get to the moon. And you just hold on to it because you don't want to do pillars and you don't have Milky Chrysalis or enough speed to do anything. Or you're playing, playing something where you can't do pillars consistently. So, the Eclipse modes, I guess. The Eccentric Vase is like the most boring equipment in the game, but I can't hate it because it is good. It is. Blast Shower, for my understanding, this thing's only use is band spam, because if you get enough of them, it'll constantly be applying. Also useful, I guess, for things like grandparents. But the main use, again, is just making it so you can have infinite uptime on your bands, which with certain survivors, very good. One comes to mind, Railgunner, obviously. Hitting those consistent crit rail bands be very powerful. Can't say I've done it very often, mainly because you do need quite a lot of gestures to get this to a point where that's somewhat effective. But I'll put it... I may be ranking this a little low, but it's just personally. I'm going to put it in low B tier. I've had builds with it where it's good, but overall it's not my favorite. Volcanic Egg is just like worse Chrysalis. I say that. It does have a solid damage explosion, but it's not as easy to control. It doesn't last as long, not as easy to skip pillars with. And you can still take damage when you're in Volcanic Egg, which is very, very counterintuitive since you're quite literally not even there. But I'm going to give it like B tier, but honestly, Volcanic Egg is a fairly... Well, B tier feels high. No, B tier feels right. I'm going to give it the bottom of B tier. Jellyfin, putting this right next to Foreign Fruit, same thing, completely pointless outside of extreme Gestures of the Drowned build. When this thing is up, it gives you an effective 83% damage reduction. which of course is a lot. That can turn almost any attack into paltry. But it's got a decently long cooldown. The elephant noise would get very annoying with enough gestures, and you would, of course, need a lot of gestures for it to be particularly effective. On command, like healing, survivability equipments can be decent, but I don't think Jelliphant is one of them. Jade Elephant. I'm just calling it Jelliphant out of instinct. Sawmorang, pretty solid equipment, in my opinion. I'm going to put this right behind DML. Not as easy to cheese Mithrix with, because you can't really fire and forget, really. But still, Sawmorang, super good. I know there is Sawmorang tech, but I haven't found the most uses for Sawmorang tech. But it is really good. If you just get right up close to a boss, throw out the blades, and then run backwards, they'll have, maybe 30 stacks of bleed on them, which is a solid amount of damage to have. And it's just in general useful. You press Q, does a lot of damage, it'll kill squishies pretty effectively, and the bleed should finish off anything tougher. Recycler, easy S tier, no doubt. Obviously, just lets you have a second chance at items. Cooldown is very long, and it's never bring this thing with gestures. But Recycler, totally fine. Totally fantastic is what I mean. Always nice to have, good for fishing, and also great to have on stage 4 to reroll your red from something like from a Ben's Raincoat into a Brilliant Behemoth or a Laser Scope or whatever it may be. Supermassive Leech, also going to put this next to Foreign Fruit because in my mind it's basically the same thing. Probably a slightly more effective Immortality build because it's 8 seconds of lifesteal. Get enough gestures and you'll have permanent uptime on that lifesteal. And the lifesteal is pretty substantial if I remember right. It's not something I have memorized, but it's I'm sure it has a use similar to a lot of these ones down here. I'm actually going to put Jelliphant and these above Gnarled Wood Sprite, just because I think there's some more uses to them in cheese strats. Gorag's Opus, totally fine equipment, but nothing special. Gonna put it here. Gives you 50% attack speed, movement speed for your whole team. Good on equipment drones. Not too much else, though. Handy to have, just in general. Attack and speed buff is good, but it's not flashy, and I don't find Gorags winning me games very often. Forgive Me Please, another easy S tier. Forgive Me Please, honestly, could be the best item in the game. Honestly, I might leave it there. If you've never used Forgive Me Please, it is one of the most eye-opening experiences. You get 3 gestures, you'll always have multiple dolls on the ground, and then just get Chronic Expansion, and then get the rest of it as movement speed, run around for a minute and a half, and you will be doing 10 billion damage with every attack. It is ridiculous how good Forgive Me Please is. It also pairs really well, of course, Gasoline, Will-O-the-Wisp, even Monster Tooth it has some use with. Anything that has an on-kill effect, Forgive Me Please, is exceptional with. And it's just, there's some equipment, right, where they're very good, but they're very specific, i.e. Hellfire Tincture, or what am I thinking of? Who am I thinking of? The backup, for example, or Blast Shower, where you need an insane amount of items to make them work. Hellfire Tincture is definitely the most obvious one. But with Forgive Me Please, it's not even like that. It is so easy to get this thing almost permanent uptime, especially if you get a Soulbound Catalyst. It will be always up, and it will be always snowballing into more and more power. If you're trying to get the Forgotten Sun skins for all the survivors, just get Chronic Expansion and Forgive Me Please. The time it takes you to run up to his boss arena, you'll already be at such insane amounts of damage that it's not even funny. I have just absolutely trounced the Forgotten Sun each time I've done that with such ease. It's hilarious. Next up, we're on to the aspects. Now, the aspects are hard to rank because they have, a 1 in 1,000 drop chance? Or is it 1 in 10,000? It might be 1 in 10,000. When you kill an elite, they have a chance to drop their essence, which gives you their effect. So you become Blazing, or you become Glacial, or you become Overloading, or you become Malachite, or you become Celestial, or you become Mending. And the thing is, most of these just aren't very good. There's very niche circumstances for some of them, I think. But it's just, I think Celestial has some uses if you're in online play. But the thing is, these aren't even something you can build towards, because you could go 100 runs and not see one of these. I think the last time I saw one was like a year ago, which is crazy to say, but these things just don't drop. It's almost impossible for me to rank these. They're so rare, I think any utility they have is completely negated by the fact that they're almost impossible to get. I'm just going to put them all in D tier, because they're all just so rare, and a lot of them are completely pointless. Like, Malachite, what are you going to do? Stop enemies from healing? They barely heal anyways. I'm just going to put them all in here. I think they're all, for the most part, very niche and very pointless. And I just don't care enough to go through them and try and find a use for them. If you're like an elite Essence Defender, I can only assume you're playing with a mod that increases their drop rate, because they're just so hard to get. Anyways, rant over. Trophy Hunter's Tricorn, totally solid equipment. Very useful for trying to set up things like Hellfire Tincture. Generally useful if a run's starting to go bad, but it's not completely lost yet. It can kill that boss and get you onto the next stage quickly. Of course, really good with any of the good boss items, Little Disciples, Shatter Spleens, the Perforators. Though, of course, it also is a little bit of like saving all of your good potions for the battle that never comes. You do need to find a place to use Tricorn before it becomes pointless, because you can't use it on Mithrix or anything like that. Yeah, Tricorn, really good. I'm probably going to drop it down to here, like right here, just because it's not quite as useful, in my opinion, as Crowdfunder or Prions. Gubo Jr. is a funny. I'm going to put it at the top of the funnies. I know Gubo has some specific survivor interactions. He's perfectly accurate with Railgunner, funnily enough. So if you have a Gummy Railgunner, he will always nail the shots. Like, he doesn't miss, as far as I know. I don't think it's even possible for him to miss. Really useful against Mithrix. So I'm honestly going to pump Gubo up. But it's mainly a meme equipment in my mind. It just doesn't really do that much. And while he's funny, he often just kind of stumbles around like an idiot, which again is funny to watch. Molotovs suck. One of the worst equipments in the game. Extremely short range. Their spread is random. The fire is contained to the ground, so it's almost pointless against flying bosses, which most of the annoying bosses are flying. You know, G-Constructs, Wandering Vagrants, Soulless Probes, the Ewu. Hell, even the Voidling, for example. He's technically a flying enemy. Yeah, Molotov sucks. I'm just going to put it down there, because there's nothing more to say about Molotov. On the other hand, S tier. This is super good. Just lets you get a bunch of extra items. Also super useful in multiplayer. I love Credit Card. Super good, of course. You want to drop it before the moon, but honestly, it's just so good that it's always worth picking up if you see it, just for the few stages where it'll get you like 6 more items. Next up, we have Caffeinator, one of the most sleeper picks in the entire game. I am also going to put Squid Polyp here, because these guys are best friends. If you want to do a really funny run, stack a few Squid Polyps and get a Remote Caffeinator. I have legitimately soloed Mithrix with this strat, just by setting up Squid Polyps to then pound him with attacks that have insane knockback and damage, and I basically infinitely generate them because of the Remote Caffeinator. And of course, Caffeinator keeps you healthy. Also really good with fireworks, if you're a fireworks kind of enjoyer. If you've never done Squid Polyp Remote Caffeinator, go do it. It turned me through a Squid Polyp hater to a Squid Polyp lover. It's just really funny. And next up, we have Ahoy, obviously. This is easy S tier. It's the best item in the game. It says Ahoy. And finally, we have Seed of Life. Seed of Life, I'm going to drop it right next to Dio's, because this is an equipment version of Dio's best friend, while also having the utility of reviving your teammates. Once it's spent, it's very good on equipment drones, because they just turn these things out every couple seconds to be spitting out those healing orbs. And it just gives you a second life. It's great. It's really useful to have on hand. A little more common than Dio's. A little bit more reliable because of that, but obviously not quite as directly powerful as Dio's, because you have to give up your equipment slot for it. But it's just really solid. You know, there's nothing more to say about it. So that brings us to the end of the equipment tier list. And next, we have the Voids. I'll see you next time. Hello, everybody. My name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to the grand finale of our Risk of Rain 2 item go through and tier list with the Void items from Survivors of the Void, a great DLC that introduced the Void items, which are sort of a twist on Lunar items, where they're supposed to sort of be side grades to items that already exist. But they tend to not exactly follow that formula, either being directly superior or in most cases just becoming more useful on different survivors. I quite love Void items. They're some of the best in the game, in my opinion. Starting off, we have Safer Spaces, the corrupted form of Tougher Times. So instead of being a chance to negate it, it just negates the first hit you take. Super useful, one of the best defensive items in the game. If you're playing the game well, you won't be getting hit that often, and when you do get hit, it gets negated by good old Safer Spaces. It's hard to beat Safer Spaces, really. It's such a fantastic item. It offers so much survivability. Sorry. Next up, we have Needle Tick, probably the best example of the Void item concept. Needle Tick is a side grade to Tri-Tip, where instead of stacking the bleeds, you stack Collapse, which does more damage, but it doesn't stack as infinitely as bleed does, as it's on a fixed timer. So it's better on burst survivors, worst on sustained survivors. Perfect example of a side grade taking an item and taking it into something that's more useful on different survivors. Next, we have Lost Seer's lenses, much maligned, and for good reason. This replaces your lens makers, and instead of being a chance to crit, it's a 0.5% chance to instant kill any non-boss enemy. So Lost Seers do suck. In extremely rare circumstances, they're actually really fun. I had a run going where I was playing Mercenary, and I died with Pluripotent Larva, which we'll get to later. And it replaced my 11 glasses with Lost Seer's lenses. And you'd be surprised on Mercenary. He attacks him. I don't know if he attacks enough or if it's just the proc chance or whatever it may be. Anytime I used my ability, I heard that ultra satisfying void noise of him dying, of enemies dying, and it felt crazy. I also was able to just trounce the Lost Sun with that build. But I'm not going to lie and say this is a good item. It is an item that is only good if you extremely skew into it. And for that, I am going to put it down with, unfortunately, what I called the do-nothing items. I know that a lot of people were talking about Chance Stall. And Chance Stall probably could be moved up, but I just don't have enough experience with it. And also it relies on gambling, which can always go bad. Wungus, absolutely amazing. One of the best healing items in the game. Where do I want to put Wungus? I'll put Wungus at the top of B tier. Mainly because Wungus isn't going to make your run, but Wungus is certainly going to help your run. I love Wungus. It's really good on every survivor, with the exception of Engineer. Next up, we have the Void Encrusted Key. I don't remember what this is called. I think it's just Void Key or something like that. It gives you a Void lockbox, which lets you choose between 3 Void items. Super good, because a lot of the Void items are super good. But it is still sort of just a win more item that can also sometimes just feed into a loop of getting more keys, hoping for something better. But still, I'm not going to say Void Keyed isn't good. I'm going to put it at the top of B tier. Again, won't make your run, but certainly can help in aiding your run. Polyloot, absolutely. Easy A tier. Polyloot gives you, trades off Ukulele's chain damage for more single target damage, and is really good on every survivor. I can't think of a single survivor that doesn't love having a Polyloot. It's just a huge direct damage buff against, single targets, which will be the boss of any run, and even their jobber minions will die extremely fast to a Polyloot. Fantastic. Love Polyloot. Really good. Fantastic on Railgunner, on Loader, on Bandit with Desperado, whatever it may be. Polyloot's always good. Void Band is not. Void Band is quite awful. It corrupts your bands and replaces them with a black hole effect that does less damage and has a longer cooldown. Again, with insane stacks, it can be good, but that's true of almost any item. this item also appeared in that mercenary run with Lost Seer's lenses. Yeah, there's not much to say about Void Bands. It's just not good. They just really are not good. And they take away some of the best items in the game in your bands and replace them with something much worse. Lysate Cell, very character dependent. The main thing I know about Lysates is it lets my engineer have 3 turrets, which is in fact insane. 3 turrets, just a lot more damage output, more healing with Bungus. I love Lysate Cells. I'm just going to drop it right next to Fuel Cell. Probably higher, though, because there's, not something that gives you extra charges of your skills very often. You know what I mean? Next up is the Voidsent Flame. This is the corrupted version of Will-O-Wisp, and in a lot of ways it's just a superior Will-O-Wisp. Where Will-O-Wisp helps you clean up, Voidsent means you never have to clean up. This means when you hit enemies at full health, they explode in a big fireball. And then, of course, that can cause a reciprocating chain effect, where one wisp explodes, the next ones explode, which cause the others to explode. It's a beautiful sort of collapse, almost, of what's going on in the game. And Voidsent Flame, really, really good. Pairs really well with the Burst Survivors. And even on non-Burst Survivors, it's sort of like Crowbar, where I know some people are like, well, Crowbar's only good on Burst Survivors. But I actually like it just to give characters that can sometimes struggle with hordes or flying enemies just the chance to kill them a lot easier. For example, Buzzsaw Multi, him with Crowbar or Voidsent Flame, shoot your scrap canister up at those eyeless pests and watch them explode. Voidsent is fantastic, and I'm going to put it a few spots above Will-O-Wisp because it is so, so good. Love Voidsent Flame. Plasma Shrimp is ATG's corrupted form, and is one of my favorite items in the game. Again, really good with Pocket ICBM. But instead of being a chance to fire a super powerful rocket, it's a more moderately powerful rocket that fires every time you attack, so long as you keep your shields up. So this is the one time PSG is actually useful. Plasma Shrimp is super good, effectively just for any sort of sustained damage survivor. It just gives them a huge, huge damage boost, which is very good, and gives them just a lot more damage output because of how Plasma Shrimp works, especially if you get a Pocket ICBM. I never leave home without Plasma Shrimp. It's so good. And even on the survivors where ATG is generally considered better, Plasma Shrimp is still fantastic, just because it's guaranteed. Over the course of a game, it may even, I think Plasma Shrimp will just outdamage ATG after a while because it activates every time. Okay, yeah, here's a really good item. This is Tentabauble, and I'm tempted to put this in S tier for the sole reason that it just cheeses the bosses in this game. If you get Tentabauble and a 57-leaf clover, you've just won the game. Because what Tentabauble does is it gives you a chance to completely immobilize enemies. It's not the highest chance, but it of course stacks with increased stacks. And with 57, you'll of course be re-rolling. Now that is slightly specific, but even without that, Tentabauble has a lot of ways of becoming more consistent. The one that comes to mind, of course, Engineer. Engineer with his turret setup, that's up to 3 times the proc chance, just because you're attacking 3 times at 3 at a time. And then, of course, Multi with his double guns has more chance of activating it. And in general, I'm probably putting it a little high, but Tentabauble is just one of those items that cheeses out so easily. Next up, we have Benthic Bloom. This is a very silly item. I'm not entirely sure of how good it is because of how rare it is. I've only gotten to use it maybe once. I think my friend had to leave, which ended the run early. But Benthic is silly enough that I'm going to put it at the top of at the bottom of B, because it's one of those potential man items, right? It has the potential, your green item could turn into 10 stacks of laser scope, and then your critical hits do 10,000% damage. but also, it could turn all of your movement items into hunter's harpoons, and then you would be completely out of luck. It is a gambler's wet dream, one may say, because what's better than saying let's go gambling than gambling every stack of one of your items for the chance at getting something crazy, whether that be, getting a extra 57 leaf clover, or 10 extra sonorous whispers, or whatever it may be. 10 brilliant behemoths, 10 Dio's best friends. Benthic Bloom is ridiculous, and it is the gambler's item of choice. But I won't put it that much higher because it really is a way that could just quickly go badly. Pluripotent, I'm going to put with the other Dios because this is Corrupted Dio's best friend. Gives you the revive, but it corrupts all of your items into void items, so this can be very bad, but I will generally still take the second chance at life because, of course, that can completely change the course of a game. And as I mentioned, if you're far enough into a run, even the kind of mediocre void items can still become really good. As I mentioned, having enough crit glasses, once you turn them all into Void Seers, you will be instant killing a lot of enemies, especially on high attack rate characters, which is very fun. Again, it's a second chance at life, which is the greatest thing you can have in a game where you often die in an instant. Next we have, this is, what's it called? Zoea? Powerful Zoea or something like that? And this corrupts every gold item into this. The Protozoan Zoa, something like that. And what it does is every 30 seconds it summons a void enemy, but they fight on your side, which is a funny. But that's kind of all. But you can, on very rare occasions, get a Void Devastator, which is one of the most powerful enemies in the game. More often than not, you'll just get some Void Reavers walking around, which, while they are very tanky, aren't going to help much with bosses, and honestly can be detrimental. It has happened to me where my Void Reaver has died, and I have gotten, unfortunately, caught in the Void Death, which instantly kills you. So honestly, this is way too high for it. I'm going to put it right next to Happiest Mask, because yes, it is very funny, but it also can instantly kill you. So keep that in mind before you corrupt anything. And then that just leaves Red Scrap, which I'm not even going to bother ranking because I've seen a red printer maybe 3 times. Anyways, that is the entire tier list. I know there have been a lot of people that have decried me in the comment sections of being absolutely insane, but I was going to see this through to the end anyways. Remember, this is a very, very stupid, poorly balanced game that is very near and dear to my heart. This is just my personal opinion on these items. I'm not saying that, if you, for example, much prefer, Goat Leg to anything else and you want to put that in S tier, totally fine. If you want to put, if you want to drop Squid Polyp down to F tier, go ahead. That's the whole point of this kind of thing. It's about giving my thoughts on all these items, which I think I've done quite well. I hope you have enjoyed this little mini-series. It didn't necessarily do the best, so it might be a while before we return to Risk of Rain 2 on the channel. But it's a game that I love, so I love talking about it. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.